Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a class from our 2022 Elul Learning Series.
So first of all, just a brief summary. These are others who have described this. This is no secret. I mean, if you read it through, you understand this. So there are 6 parts, according to some. God in the heavenly court judge all living creatures on Yom Hadin, all living creatures, the day of judgment. One by one, they all come before him, right, in one form, depending upon how you understand the Hebrew there, and he decrees their destiny. And then on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, it's written and, it's inscribed and so forth and so on. Who by this, who by that. But repentance, prayer, and tzedakah can avert the severity of the decree, and I emphasize that, the severity of the, right. Pages 143, 144, that's right, thank you, yes. Anyway, and God wants the sinner to repent. He does not take pleasure in punishing. A human's origin is dust, and the end is in dust. God is ever-living king, okay? So that's basically it, and we'll go over that in greater detail in a few moments. All right, so here's my page. First of all, just as an observation, this is a critique I have of the translation. Okay, the first 2 paragraphs in the Mahzor describe the end of days of judgment, right? This is an end of days judgment. That's what it describes. And so the Lev Shalem translation should have kept the first paragraph in the future tense, as it did in the second paragraph, because it's intended to be a picture of the final day of judgment, okay? And as the note on the page indicates, the one on the side of the page, the brilliance of the poem's author is that he takes an end of days prophecy and he applies it to the present time, okay? So in the shofar passage, he uses the words of the prophecy of Isaiah, along with the allusions to the theophanies at Mount Sinai. So he combines the imagery of Exodus 19 and 20, Isaiah 27, and 1 Kings 19 to create a mysteriously powerful experience. All of this is important to the present day. All right, and as expressed in the 3rd and 4th paragraphs, this is an awesome depiction of God's power as judge, who has infinite powers to punish, yes, but who cares for his creatures who are on trial. He cares for us, and therefore he's willing to be compassionate. Okay, that's the ultimate concept here. But I happen to agree in this case, not with the translation, but with the note on the side of the page. It's brilliance on this poet's part.
Which side?
On the side with the comment, not the spiritual reading. On the right side. Okay, on the right. Remember the technical, right. Interpretive comments are on the right side. There's a lot of good stuff on both pages. We're going to look at it because the commentary is very helpful. On the left side of the page are spiritual augmentation for our reading and our spiritual growth. All right. Now, who wrote this beautiful poem? For centuries, the tradition was, and I used to teach it this way, although I knew that there were questions about it, it was supposed to be Rabbi Amnon of Mainz, right? Who is described in the text as a rabbi of great renown, okay, and whose story is the focal point of the poem, okay, because there's a whole story about him that was told as an explanation of how the poem was written, okay, and this comes out of Europe, northern. This Amnon of Mainz, Rabbi Amnon of Mainz. And my friend David Golinkin, who's a wonderful guy to search out information. He's a walking encyclopedia, and he knows how to get quick results from looking at different sources. So he calls our attention to the fact that nowhere in any rabbinic source is this great rabbi ever mentioned. He does not exist. In fact, it may be a play on the word Amnon, which, as Vered Hoppenstein will verify for us, comes from the Hebrew word emunah, amen, right, indicating this man's fierce loyalty and commitment to God. He was a sort of a martyr for the sake of God. Does anybody remember the story about Amnon of Mainz? Yes, Vered.
The story, in short, is that he was bleeding as his limbs, his hand and feet were cut off, and he was in great agony and in pain, and then he was saying the Netana Toke.
Yes, and it's preceded by that's how it ended, right?
Yeah, there was preceding that. Wasn't there a story that he was told by the king that that will you convert? And he said, "Let me think about it." And then he repents for 3 days and things like that.
Right.
And says, "Why did I do that? Why did I hesitate at all in what I was doing?"
And he throws himself at the king's mercy, and the king decides to torture him. And he is tortured, and as a result of the pain of the torture, he goes, and before he dies, and we don't know if he dies, because according to the story, he just disappeared.
Yeah. Did he die? Wasn't there like his disciple had a dream, and he heard about?
That's the point. Rabbi Meshulam ben Kalonimus ben Meshulam, who is a real person, all right, according to the story, he had a dream where his teacher, Rabbi Amnon, appeared to him and dictated to him the poem. And according to the tradition, Rabbi Kalonimus wrote it down, and that's how it was preserved. And all of this happened around 1000 BC, around 1000 CE in Germany. Okay, these are all, the Kalonimus. All right. What do we know now about this poem? We know that it was in existence sometime around the 8th century of the Common Era, because 2 snippets of the poem in manuscript form were found in the Cairo Geniza, and they have been dated to the 8th century of the Common Era. It's the time of the Geonim. And furthermore, people who have analyzed the language actually ascribe it to an earlier generation, because that's when those documents were found. I mean, that's the dating of the documents, right? That's the dating of the documents. But the fact is that clearly it was in existence before that. And there are those who suggest that one of the great Paitanim, Yanai, of Eretz Yisrael, who lived around the year 500, give or take, that he may be the author of this. The point is, it goes back to Eretz Yisrael from probably the Byzantine period, when the Byzantine Christians controlled Eretz Yisrael. And here, so I have to ask the question, and they know that from the language of the poems. Kalir, we mentioned that last time, the great Kalir, this is the guy who is his predecessor, Yanai, okay? And their style influenced a lot of poetic writing that developed in Northern Europe later on in the Middle Ages. And here's the thing. The question is, how did a poem that presumably was written, created around 500 of the Common Era, end up in Germany in the 11th century? Okay, or whenever it got there, we don't know for sure. It is one of the great other Paitanim in the 12th century refers to it backwards, and he lives in the 12th century. So somewhere between 1000 and 1150, give or take, somewhere within that 150-year period, it was known in Germany, in Northern Europe. Okay, all right. So how did it get there? The answer is the name of the rabbi who was mentioned, who wrote it down, Kalonimus. The Kalonimus family, Kalonimos, is Greek. Greek. My great Greek wedding. Here it is absolutely true. It's a Greek word. Remember, the father of the bride, everything comes from Greek, right? Greek. This is Greek. Yeah, this is Greek, okay? All right. And what does kalonimos mean? It means Shem Tov, a good name. But that name pops up later in the Middle Ages, but not necessarily in these areas. So it's hard to know if that's a spin-off from kalonimos. We don't know that. But anyway, it means Shem Tov, good name. And that was the name of the family. We know from different accounts and different documents that they were present in representatives of the family were present, and here it's not sure whether it is in the 9th century or the 10th century of the Common Era, the 800s or the 900s. Some people, it was King Otto of Germany who invited them. Others push it back to the days of Charlemagne or his son Louis the Pious in the 9th century. Both of those kings sought to develop the internal economy of Germany and France, because remember, Charlemagne, the Carolingian kings ruled parts of Germany and France, okay, both. And so they wanted to use the river systems, the great river systems of Europe, as a transit route for trade, and they succeeded. And among those who contributed to that growth of the economy were the Colonymites, because they were merchants who came over there. But they became great scholars and literati and very well known, and martyrs. One of the members of the family is mentioned as being one of the martyrs in Mainz in the Crusades. Okay, so this is a very powerful family. They come from Italy, and Italy was parts of it, a lot of it, lesser parts, but the part of Italy they came from for a long time during the Middle Ages was controlled by the Byzantines. And that's an area of Italy that received a lot of cultural input from Eretz Yisrael, because they were all part of the Byzantine Empire. And as you know, Italy, the tip of Italy is the shortest distance from Israel. Very short, relatively speaking, across the Mediterranean. So that's the conduit. The very family, ironically, the very family that was mentioned as involved with the actual preservation of the poem, if not themselves, but the people who came over with them somewhere in that transit were the ones that probably carried the poem over from Eretz Yisrael. So what goes around comes around. It's really interesting. But the language is clearly not the language of medieval Northern Europe. That's the point. And that's the kicker. Okay? Something else of interest. There are some scholars who have shown that certain of the themes and even the details of the poem have their parallels in Byzantine Christian poetry. Okay? Now, it's not surprising that the poetic culture of a country influences Jewish poetry. Where do we know that that was rampant? Where a country's, the non-Jewish population, majority population, their culture influenced Jewish culture in the Middle Ages. Anybody know? And culture and thinking.
Was that in Spain?
Yes. Yes, of course. The great Hebrew poets in Spain, like Halevi and others around him, their motifs and their style of poetry was based on the Arabic poetry of their age, the structures that they used, okay? And also the grammar, Hebrew grammar developed, and Barrett knows this very well, in Spain in the Middle Ages. That's where the rules of grammar developed. Where did they get their rules? They borrowed them from Arabic, because they're both closely related Semitic languages. It was a smart thing to do. The Arabs were very much into language. They believed that Arabic was the language of Allah. The same way we believe Hebrew was the language of Hashem, right? Same thing. Anyhow, so it's yes, to suggest. And where did Rambam get his medicine? From Arabs. Where did he get his Aristotelian philosophy? From Arabs. Okay, I mean, so the cross-cultural, influencing was there. It apparently happened to one degree or another in Eretz Yisrael, under the Byzantines. Now, the Byzantines were not very pleasant toward the Israelites, toward the Jews, but nonetheless, the Jews lived there. And then they moved to Italy to get rid of, get away from the center of Byzantine influence. And there, too, it percolated. So it's not surprising that this connection exists. Okay? All right. So this is part of what I wanted to introduce. Let me see if there's anything else. The final point, what is really interesting, just as proof of the fact that Middle Eastern Jewish texts were carried over at this time into Europe and even in France. So the bishops, two bishops who lived in the first half of the 9th century, when the Carolingian kings ruled powerfully in France and Germany, okay? These are the bishops of Lyon, the town of Lyon in France, all right? And one of them's name is Agobard, and the other one's name is Amulo. And both Agobard and Amulo indicate to us that they were aware of, well, one of them, Agobard, we know, seems to have been aware of the Shiur Koma, the early Talmudic period mystical tracts that actually define the proportions of God's body. Okay, they had this belief that God had a giant body of light. It's a belief, it's a concept they may have gotten actually from the Manichaeans. Okay, anyhow, and if you read, I've read those texts. Okay, so God, some of you have heard me talk about this before. God's legs were 100 million parsangs long, and his arms were 25 million parsangs long, and so forth and so on. Huge proportions of a body of light. Okay, and so Agobard specifically refers to the fact that these crazy Jews believe that God has a body, the God in heaven, God the Father, not God the Son, right? The God in heaven has a body. And they're a bunch of crazy, wacko people. You want to believe in them? You want to let them live here? That's they use it as anti-Jewish propaganda. And then secondly, they knew of another source that emerged out of, and anyway, those traditions emerged either out of Eretz Israel or Bavel, but they're Middle Eastern in origin, and they came through that conduit, okay, into Northern Europe, talking 9th century France, okay. But there's another document that they both know, which is the Toldot Yeshu traditions. Do you know what the Toldot Yeshu traditions are? I know I've taught this before, maybe in my classes. Toldot Yeshu HaNotzri is the Jewish version of the Gospels. It turns them completely on their head, on its head, and says all kinds of nasty things about Jesus, not so much about Mary, but a lot of bad stuff about Jesus based upon Jewish interpretations of gospel, of canonical gospel and non-canonical gospels in the Christian world. Okay, I'm not going to. If you want, we can study that at some point in time. It's a scandal. Okay, and this became one of the most popular books in the Jewish communities, to the point that I can prove to you that my grandmother, may she rest in peace, who used to call Jesus Yoshka Pondra, okay, not Yeshu. There's a Talmudic tradition that instead of calling him Yeshua, they cut off the ayin and it was Yeshu, okay, because Yeshua means salvation, right? But Yeshu means nothing, okay? Somebody said it stood for Yimach Shmo V'Zichro, may his name and memory be blotted out, okay? Anyhow, so that's what they did, all right? That's just one example. But all kinds of other very nasty things they said about him. I know that my grandmother called Jesus Yoshka Pondra. Now, in the Talmud, this is going to get complicated, so you can stay awake, all right? Pay attention. In the Talmud, he's called Yeshu ben Pandera, or Yeshu ben Pantera, in the Babylonian Talmud. Okay, by the way, he may be mentioned in the Talmud no more than 40 times. In the entire Talmud, maybe 40 times, that's all. He's not a big deal. But these traditions are found in. Okay, So he's Yeshu ben Pandera. You hear Yoshka Pondra there? Pandera, Pondra, right? And Yeshu, he becomes little Yeshu. What do you call him? Yoshka, right? It's sort of like a little boy, Yeshu, okay, Yoshka. Yoshka Pondra. Where did my grandmother learn that? Must have heard it in the family, okay? So her family came over from Russia in 1904, all right? So this is Eastern European lore, okay? Now, could they have gotten it from the Talmud, where they originally appeared by that time? Impossible. Why? Because the Christians from the 13th century on made the Jews take it out of the Talmud. And the fact is, for centuries, if you read the Talmud, it was totally Yeshu rhyme. It was free of any content of Yeshu. Not there. So they couldn't have learned it from the Talmud. Where do they learn it? From the Toldot Yeshu stories, which are being transmitted father to son, family to family. And in fact, were actually in printed Hebrew texts available in the 16th and 17th century because the Christians didn't know about them. They were discovered in the 17th century by a bunch of Christian monks who became interested in Jewish literature in Hebrew. And they found out about it. But by then, there were no Jews around. They couldn't do anything about it except yell and scream. Interesting, huh?
Whoa.
And Rabbi,
yes.
I'm confused. First, you said that there was that almost 40 times he's named in the Talmud or referred to in the Talmud, and then you said the Talmud is completely Yeshu right.
You didn't hear me say, yes, I said the Christians' censorship took it out.
But that wouldn't be Talmud, that would be their translation of it.
No, they made the Jews take it out of all of their documents, and the Jews complied with that, because on that was the condition on the basis of which they could keep the Talmud text. That's history.
But you're saying, but that would be Talmud texts within Christendom, not within other areas of the world that Christianity didn't.
Oh, right,
reach.
but those are Muslim areas, and they didn't care that much about it because that wasn't Jewish.
Yeah, so in other words, there are versions of the Talmud that still retain the material.
Well, no, we don't know about it. They haven't been found as far as I know. The manuscript traditions that we have are only from Europe. I've never heard of any medieval manuscripts found, from Arab countries. But if so, yeah. But then the people in Europe would never have known about it.
Was there any mention of them prior to the 20th century? And like immediately prior to the 20th century? It was only when they.
No, the fact is that they know that they were there in the 12th century because they have manuscripts from Europe from the 12th century where those things are still in there. That was before the censorship. Okay. As far as I know, there's no documentary evidence for that appearing again in the Talmud until today's printed texts of the Talmud, free of censorship, do include them in brackets as stuff that was put in once those earlier manuscripts were found. But the point is, but we know for a fact that the Toldot Yeshu traditions continued to be in print down into the early modern period in writing, right, manuscript form, because the collections of them that the monks collected, from Jewish sources, are there, and they've been studied.
Rabbi?
But the texts within within the Islamic world, were they?
I don't know of any. I know of nothing about that. It's not something that has been studied. Okay. If it's there, I don't know about it. All right, somebody else.
I did. I was interested in, to me, what you just said implied that there was some level of easing of virulent anti-Semitism among Christian clergy, because the source for all those problems in the Talmud were Jews, often rabbis, that were forced to convert. So then they converted, were on the other side in the disputations. Those were the informants.
No, let me correct you. They were not rabbis. They were people who'd studied Talmud who chose to convert. They were They were apostates. They were not.
Yeah, but when you convert under enormous pressure.
No. They were people who had ideology. We know who some of them were. They were people who have the sources in the Middle Ages tell us they were people who were always questioning the rabbis.
Oh, interesting, because I thought at least one lost a disputation and was forced to convert.
No.
But regardless, that's much earlier.
The first major disputation was in Paris.
I thought it was 14 something. No.
That's two disputations later. The first major disputation was in Paris in 1240, and that's when it was in preparation for that and subsequent to that the Christians became aware of all of this stuff. Stop. In 1236, an apostate Jew who seems to have been influenced by Karaism of all things, because the questions that he raises about the Talmud are the same as the Karaites raised, all right? Because certain Karaites criticized the Talmud, all right? So this Jew becomes a Catholic a monk. He contacts the Pope and says the Jews are saying nasty things about our God and about our religion, okay? And more than that, they no longer believe that the Bible is the true source of Judaism. They believe the Talmud is. And that violates the principles on the basis of which we justify tolerating them. Okay, that's what he tells the Pope in 1236. This is not the major item on the Pope's agenda. He has a lot of internal heresies that he's dealing with. But because of his heresy sensitivity, eventually he picks up on that. And in 1240, he mandates this disputation. Okay? The rabbis schmeiced the Christians in the disputation. There's no question about it. It didn't matter. So what they did was they made the deal with the Jew. And no, there was a book burning in Paris in 1242. A book burning. Okay? And there were popes from at that point on who actually issued edicts, to burn books. But the Jews negotiated a deal where they said, we will take out the passages you find to be obnoxious, and if we can keep our Talmuds. And they said yes. And from that point on, all the manuscripts that we have access to from the Middle Ages, not many of them, by the way, there are not a lot, but the ones we do have are free of all that stuff. Okay? So that's what happened. And subsequent disputations, it's the same thing. The Jew who was the convert, the apostate, was not pressured. These are Jews who actually became for whatever their reasons, a lot of them were influenced by philosophy. Some of them were influenced by mysticism, whether they were or a combination of both. And they began to ask questions about Judaism. And the way the monks were able to present to them Christianity, because you had a lot of sophisticated monks running around at that time. And a lot of them knew the Talmud, knew rabbinic sources at that time, or Midrash. They studied them. And from the 13th century, you had schools of monks studying Hebrew and Arabic so that they could use that to help convert Jews. It really didn't work in terms of mass numbers. That didn't happen. Okay, but there were those who did. Anyway, those are the people who ultimately turned on the Jews because, if you convert, you're very zealous for your faith, and very often you turn on the faith out of which you came.
I didn't I didn't position the question the right way, but I was interested in why you thought the Talmud was a focus, but not I think you called it, my internet went out, but I think you called it the Toldot Yeshua.
Why they didn't know about the Toldot Yeshua. They didn't know about that until later. That's the point. They didn't know about these things. The Jews kept them covered up because they were not essential. They were folk literature. They were not. The monks knew that Judaism's religious foundations, they knew where they were. That's what they went after. Okay, they did not keep track of folk traditions. No, that's the advantage of folk traditions. The folk know it, and they learned to keep it under wraps. Most Jews couldn't read this stuff, but the stories were told over and over again, and it helped sort of maintain the Jewish equilibrium, saying this whole religion is a bunch of hooey. That's what they said about Christianity. Their God is a bunch of hooey. What they teach is a bunch of hooey, and it's based upon a bunch of hooey. Okay, and so they could laugh a little because some of the stuff that they wrote about is laughable. Now I've read the Toldot Yeshu. There are numbers of versions of it. It's folk literature, but that's how getting back to where I started. That's how my Bubby learned about Yosh Kippur. That's my point. And my point is that those traditions were already known by a few, and not I don't know that they saw the sources. When these bishops in the 9th century talked about these things, I don't know that they were actually holding. They couldn't read Hebrew, we know that, but they heard about it and they mentioned it. But it went bye-bye because the kings, the Carolingian kings, didn't listen to them. They ignored them. In fact, they did things that got these guys angry by supporting these Jewish communities, because that's where they got taxes and that's where they were making money, because these Jews were part of international trade organizations. And they were pumping resources, financial resources, into their economies. Okay? So that's the point. Okay. All right. That is the end of my presentation. I just did this just so you understand that this poem is, it's took a while for people to really come to an understanding of what it represented, where it was from, and now we can study it and really see the amazing poet. The guy's a genius, whoever wrote this. I mean, that's my feeling. And I must say, in preparing this, once again, I've taught it before, but never, in search of all the sources and using what was mentioned here, but also following up on word uses. And it's amazing, the control that this guy has over language and the structure that he puts into it, and the whole concept of taking an end of days. I mean, what it does is it's saying that each Rosh Hashanah, the reader of this should understand it, each Rosh Hashanah, from their own personal perspective, is as big as the day of judgment at the end of time is going to be, which means take it seriously. And it means that we don't know what ultimately God has planned for the end of days. I mean, it'll be the Mashiach site, right? That's what will follow. Yeah, the Messianic era. Okay. All right. Next year, you're not going to have a Mashiach's experience. But the point is, if you take it seriously and repent, God is eager to take you back. He would rather not punish you. Then that comes after the list of all the punishments that could happen, right? Which is very intimidating. Okay? All right. So that's the point. And this had an impact. Jews who read it carefully and absorbed it realized that they had a serious task ahead of them, and they had to undertake it. And that's why it's on Rosh Hashanah as well as Yom Kippur, right? You'd say it all days because it covers the whole period. Okay. All right. Let's see what it says. All right. So there's the introduction. All right. Ubechein l'chata ale kedusha. May our sanctification ascend to you. Ki ata Eloheinu melech mochel v'soleach. You are our compassionate, our forgiving King. You are our forgiving King. And what it says with the reference here to Ale Kedusha, it probably was added on when this was placed right before the Kedusha. Because the Kedusha and the repetition of the Amidah, the big Kedusha, Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzbaot, and all that stuff is said right after this. So that makes it into a prelude to the Kedusha, and the ending, which is part of the poem, apparently, also has a big emphasis on Kedusha. So now whether that was added on at the end, I don't know.
Except on my holidays, we never say that line, right?
Correct.
Thanks.
We never say this whole thing. No. This is for the high holidays. Yeah. Okay. All right. So when Atana Tokef Kedushat Hayom, okay, you hear it says, "Let us speak of." I think it could be. I think it let us. I like better this concept. Natana Tokef is strength. Okay. Let us give strength. I like somebody translated it. Let us affirm. To affirm, right? Firm, as in firm, strong. To affirm in words the holiness of this day, right? Ki hu nora va'ayom, because it is awe-inspiring. To me, this is like a biblical hendiades, where it's two words that are saying the same thing, really. Okay, it is awe-inspiring. Okay, ayom meaning the idea being that the word ayom means inspiring, and awe is nora. It's awe-inspiring. Okay, that's what it is. It's awesome. It's awe, but you see that has multiple meanings, right? It could mean what could it mean if he's saying it's nora? Okay, that word. What is the root of that word? It's Yud Resh Aleph, which means fear, right? It's fear-inspiring, like Yirat Hashem, fear of God, right? People translate it as reverence, but it really means fear. You realize you're in the presence of a super powerful force, okay? And that's what this is. You're supposed to realize that you are standing in the presence of but this is now talking, though, you'll see. Why? Uvo tinasei malchutecha. On this day, your kingship, the recognition of your kingship, will be elevated, will be exalted. This is what I'm saying. That's a plural form, tinasei. All the verbs in this paragraph are plural. So it's really using the imagery of the future day of judgment, which is an awesome day. Okay, this is talking, that's what I'm saying. They should have left it, as many translations do, in the future. Okay? The Ikon b'chesed, your chesed, your loving kindness will be established. No, sorry. V'ikon b'chesed kisach. Your throne as king will be established through loving kindness. Interesting, right? So this is, you can see the poetry here, the two different remember, this is this parallelism. Your kingship will be elevated, and your throne will be established on compassion. Okay? So they're talking about how people will come to understand God. Then it goes on. V'teshev alav be'emet. And you will sit upon that in truthfulness. Okay, and then it goes on again with the next emet. This concept of emet, and associating that with God is very common. You know it from the prayer service. There's a whole paragraph that deals with emet, and we say it every morning. What is it? Emet, 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 right? That line, the whole everything, emet v'yatziv, right? That whole paragraph, the word emet appears 6 times. Okay, God is the God of truth. Okay, and the interesting thing is that ends up with the prayer of Gal Yisrael, right? God is going to redeem us before you go into the Amidah, right? And it says that, and that is definitely a reference to the future redemption. That's what it says. It is clear. It's a reference to the future redemption. All right. So the point is this notion of God being emet, truthful, reliable, faithful, committed, loyal, right? That's God. But here it serves both purposes. He's a God in whom you can have trust because he's truthful, but also he judges in truth, right? A judge, emet, has got to be a defining quality of a judge. Can anybody argue that case? No. I mean, if a judge is untruthful, what kind of a judge is he? He should be taken off the bench, right? So that's God. All right. So here, emet, it is true. Ki atahu dayanu mochiach. You are a judge and you reprimand, right? You call people to account. The odea va'ed, and you know and you witness.
I have a question about the first BMS.
Huh?
I have a question about the first BMS.
Yes. Go ahead.
And I'm wondering, our Mahzor translated as from which you rule in truth, but I wonder if the BMS might refer to the entire first two lines that we've read, that the whole thing, that this is all true.
Oh, I see. In other words, it's an affirmation of everything that came beforehand. It could be. I mean, it could be that, but it could be the whole notion of steadfastness. Remember the line that in the Emet Yatziv, right? The paragraph after the passage after the third paragraph of the Shema, with all those descriptives. Yeah. The basic theme from that is permanence. Truthfulness, loyal. It's associated with being firm, permanent. Emet Yatziv, nachon, established, right? All those terms point to some of the terms in here. I don't know if they have that in mind. It just hit my brain. Maybe there's some connection. But so it could refer to everything that came beforehand, right? Or it just could be like a summary statement that this is you, right?
It fits well with the melody that I know for that part.
Yes.
To have that other interpretation as a possibility.
Yes, but I mean, emet v'yatziv v'nachon v'kayam v'yashar v'ne'eman v'ahuv v'nechmad v'na'im v'nora v'adir mitukan v'mekubal. I mean, all that stuff, it talks about all kinds of things, but a dominant theme there is permanence, reliability, faith. You're loyal, you're permanent. What you say is, it's going to be, right? That's the point. And that leads into the promise of the redemption. And so it could be something similar here. But I don't know. It's a poem. Yeah. So in a sense, we all have the right and privilege to find out how it's meaningful to each of us. Read John Ciardi's book, How Does a Poem Mean? Okay, tells you that's the point. A poem is intended to bring the reader into the poem and to feel it in a way that that person can find meaning. So that's what we're doing.
All Joel?
Right. Yes.
In view of the fact that we're supposed to have been made in God's image, would any of these qualities, such as truth, be something that it could be implying that we should have that as well?
I think so. I mean, at any point in time, yes. I mean, I think any Jew who understands Judaism has to understand that it is ultimately, when we say that we're an image of God, it means we're supposed to imitate God. And any true religion, any religion of meaning, of worth, has the concept of imitatio Dei, of making the qualities we associate with God our own. And therefore, by definition, what you're saying is correct. But that can apply to any divine quality.
Actually, when I was a kid, my mother thought we should get to know more boys, and she told me I should learn to lie.
No.
Okay. Wait, I don't get the connection between getting to know more boys and lying. Somehow.
Sometimes you have.
Because I was too truthful and I told them where to go.
Oh, I see.
I thought it was the boys who lie.
Yeah, but I mean, you can lie about, oh yeah, my family's very wealthy, I come from good roots. Yeah. There are a bunch of them, really.
Works for me every time.
I see. There you go. Okay. Wait till Olam Haba. Then the world to come, then they're going to come back to you and say, did you really do that? You said, no, I was only a kid. Okay, we forgive you.
Lie even then.
All right. Okay. Anyway. Okay. So, but again, Emet, it is true. It is correct that you are a judge who can point the finger. You can, you're a mochiach. It means you rebuke someone. You can rebuke, the person standing in front of you, right? And you know very well what's going on. We've already established that with some of the other piyutim. God reads our insides, right? And you can actually serve as a judge who, from your own knowledge of us, can bring testimonial evidence, to point the finger. And then then here again, kotev v'chotem, right? You write and you seal. His book, right? The great book. Yes, that whole story of the two books that he keeps. The sofer umoneh, you count and you measure. The tiskor, and here's the thing, the tiskor kol hanishkachot, and you remember things that have been forgotten. Stuff that in my mind that, I forgot that. God remembers that, right? And then the tipatach, and the tiftach, and you will open up the book of remembrances, right? And where you wrote it all down, umei elav yikarei, and from there it will be read, right? The chotam yad, this is great line, chotam yad kol adam bo, and the signature of each human is in the book. In other words, it's as if we signed off that those statements were true. Okay? It's you're right. You got to sign something when you have a document. You sign it. Did you indeed say these things? Yes, I did. I signed it. In other words, God's knowledge of our actions is our signature, right? And He can show it. That's the whole point here. He knows when we're guilty. Okay? All right. So this is this God before we stand. I want to recommend the thought that we talked about the influence of these earlier mystical traditions where there's a lot of repetition. And you have here this line, Atahu Dayan Umochiach V'yodea Va'ed V'chote B'chotem V'sofer Umaneh V'tizkor. Okay, but let's go just more. There are 8 different terms here to describe the different way that God is aware of all this information. 8 different terms. Again, it's that style of repetition, but here it's talking about God, which is what the other mystical traditions talk about, but this is not that mystical, right? This is talking about, because the mysticism sort of transcends things like sinfulness and stuff like that. Here it's being applied to the judicial power of this God. Okay, remember, it's Norah Be'ayom. It is awesome, right? It's awesome that this God as judge is doing all of this, all by God's self. He doesn't need lawyers. He doesn't need any stenographers taking the notes at the trial or whatever. He's got it all because it's God. So He can make a good case against us. So it starts off fear, right? It's putting the fear of God into us. Okay. And it's intentional. Okay. However, we're going to find out now we're not the only ones. Remember, it's not just us. And this is God. This is not, right? This is God defining, all we're doing here is talking about how God operates. And it makes a final statement that our hand is in there. He knows what we did. We signed off because He knows what we did and He remembers. Okay. Now, Uveshofar gadol yitaka. Okay. And you remember the Chazanim love to do Uveshofar gadol yitaka. And there's some that would say yitaka, yitaka, yitaka. Right. And then it says, B'chol mamadaka yishama. And that still small voice is what is heard. Okay? All right. So where does this come from? The shofar gadol yitaka, those terms are from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 27, verse 13. Okay? You can look at the notes. Okay? That's from Isaiah. But the reference, of course, to the shofar is where? What shofar is this talking about? Well, on the one hand, it's the shofar of the end of days. But it's also, where else do we find a shofar in a critical moment of making God's presence known? You know the answer. Where?
At the burning bush.
Mount Sinai, Exodus 19, Exodus 20. Both chapters have it. They heard a great shofar sounding, a powerful shofar. So that's the imagery that we have here. It's like this God who was present at Sinai, this God who will be present at the ultimate end of days. His presence is announced with the sound of the shofar. And of course, this is intended with Rosh Hashanah in mind, as we will find out, because it's the day when you sound the shofar, right? So it means when you hear that shofar, what should that make you recall? What should that bring to mind? That you are in whose presence? The presence. Okay. Shakes you up.
Whose voice is the still small voice? Is that Hashem's?
Aha! I have the answer to that. Some of you have heard me talk about this. When does the Kol Damama Daka come from? That comes from 1 Kings chapter 19. Also Mount Sinai. But who heard that one?
We're almost there.
Elijah the prophet. Okay.
Kings?
Yes.
19.
And that is and I interpret that actually as a different school of thought indicating that the true essence of God, or God had to appear in an essence that didn't really grab the fullness of who God is. When he gave the Torah, he had to appear with a loudspeaker, right? He had to make a big noise because there were hundreds of thousands of people listening to him. He was talking from the top of a mountain, right? And he had to get their attention. So it's a booming voice that scares the dickens out of them, right? Because afterwards, what do they have to say to Moses? You stand between God and us. We can't take it anymore. It's too scary. It's going to kill us. Okay, he says, okay. All right, but that's the shofar is sounded with that, all right? But when Elijah's on the mountain, it's the exact opposite. He comes to the entrance of the cave, okay? And there's a wind that blows and cracks, smashes rocks. It's like a tornado or a hurricane. Rocks are smashing. Big noise, big wind, crashing of rocks. Okay. But then it says God was not in the wind. Then there comes an earthquake. The mountain shakes as it does during the giving of Torah. The mountain shakes. Mount Sinai shakes. Okay. God is not in the earthquake. And then it says, there appeared fire, probably is lightning, okay, or fire, take your pick, okay? And it says, but God was not in the fire. And then it says, and then there was a kol d'mama daka. And it's not, what does that mean? The voice or the sound of d'mama can mean a mumbling, or it can actually mean silence, and daka is thin. So it means either an inaudible sound or a very tiny, tiny sound. And when Elijah hears that, what does he do? He takes his cloak and covers his face because he now knows that he's in God's presence. Okay? So that's what it's about. It's really interesting that it's brought up here, because it's telling us that, yes, there's this loud sound of God. When you think about a powerful presence, right? Think about when a king appears, right? Think about when Darth Vader comes out of the rocket, right? And he's a dom, bom, 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 right? Frightening, awesome, yeah. Okay, lahavdil. I don't want to make a comparison between God and Darth Vader. So don't say Rembaum said God's like Darth Vader. No, but the impact of the noise is the same, right? That's what this is. But it's saying that that's not really God, right? The real God is the silence, this unknowable. So basically what it's saying is everything we're saying about God now is what makes an impact on us. But the truth of the matter is God transcends all of this. God is totally spiritual. And then that spirituality we cannot comprehend, but we believe it's there. And we have to, that's even more powerful than the noise. Because at least noise you understand, right? When you're in the middle of an earthquake, and at least if the house isn't falling down on top of you, you can say, okay, I live in Los Angeles. We have earthquakes. That's what's going on right now. Okay, it'll pass. It's part of how we are. Okay, and it's noisy. It's scary. It passes. Okay, but what would happen if the house and the ground shook and there was no noise, or it didn't shake? But somehow you had a sense of immense power, but there's nothing. Okay? And it's telling you, the reality is, God is beyond power. That's what this is saying. And I love that comparison right there. Because it's telling us that, this is not an easy thing to talk about, to put into words. All right. So now, what is the result of this manifestation of God, whether the quiet one and or the noisy one? Umalachim yechapezun, right? Angels quake and quiver from fear. And look at the nun. You see that nun ending? That's an Aramaic ending that's typical of Talmudic Hebrew that was spoken in Eretz Yisrael. Even the Hebrew that was there was affected by Aramaic. So it's very typical. That's an example of a Middle Eastern, early medieval, late rabbinic Hebrew. Okay? And this is, you'll see it occurs a couple of times. And he may do it because of the poetic meaning, the poetic factor here, you'll see in a moment. So, all right. So again, the angels quiver and quake, and it continues. Ura'ada yechazum. Yochezun. And shaking, ra'ada, that's what happened at Mount Sinai. That wasn't where God was not with Elijah. Okay. And they're grasped, they're taken over by shaking. This is them personally shaking. And so what do they say? And they say, vayomru hine yom hadin, behold, this is the day of judgment. Okay? Lifkod, to take into account, al tzva marom badim, that the host on high is being judged. Who is this host on high? The angels, right? And maybe and human beings whose souls are on high, for all we know. But if in other words, you think, well, if I make it into Olam Haba, I'm free of all this stuff. And this is saying no. There's no escaping God's judgment. No escaping God's judgment. Okay? Right. Can you, if you're going to talk, it's okay, but can you mute yourself? Thank you. Okay. All right. Anyway, so they know they're going to be judged up there. And then it goes on. B'chol ba'ei olam ya'avrun lefanecha kivnei maron. And all the creatures in the world are going to pass before you as b'nei maron. All right. Before we get to that word, which is a very challenging word, notice tzva marom, the line before, the host on high, b'nei maron, right? Poetry, yes? So you have the chafezun, yochezun, and then you have ya'avrun, will pass before you, kivnei maron. The use of the nuns, okay? And the un ending, yechezun un.
Can you tell me where we are? I'm not finding it here.
What?
Can you tell me where we are? I'm not seeing it.
It's in the second paragraph in the middle.
Fourth line.
I'm talking about the third line, the fourth line, the second, third, and fourth lines. V'chil or
Rabbi Ben-Zion Bergman taught us, Olive
I
Shalom.
got it. Thank you.
That we should read this last line, the Chol boy olam yavrin lefanecha kivenumeron.
I'll get to that.
Really
B'nei Maron.
Consensus.
Yeah, no. There's a different, not quite. It means numbering, but numeron, 1 second. Yes, that's part of the discussion. Okay. There are actually 3 different interpretations I saw for that. One interpretation that is commonly used is sheep. Okay. Like here it says a flock of sheep. I'm not sure where they got to that. It may be because of what happens afterwards. What does it say? As a shepherd examines the flock. And clearly sheep are mentioned. So therefore that's what follows. Therefore it could very well be that Maron has something to do with sheep. Okay. On the other hand, it has up above Tzva Maron. What's Tzava? It's a multitude of a large number, right? So therefore it could be Kivin Numeron, as in the case of a numeron. But a numeron means a platoon of soldiers. In Greek usage, which was used by the Roman army too, it is a term that refers to a group of soldiers. Or say a numeron, which means a numbered number. In other words, it's a body of people of who are defined by a number. So it doesn't necessarily mean census. Okay, I'm sort of tweaking what Benzi said. Okay, Norm, you got it? Norm?
What?
I'm commenting on your comment about Benzi Bergman. Yeah, okay, that is, he's not quite. It may not be census. It is a numbered body of people. Okay, and they assume, since it has tzava beforehand, which can refer to a host of soldiers as well as a host of angels, and that's what it's talking about here. So, but the third one is very interesting. Maron, somebody suggested, comes from the Hebrew root mem resh he or mem resh yud, which means to rebel. Bnei Maron in Bamidbar, when you know the story when the Korach and his rebellion, right? The ground opens up and fire comes down and all that stuff. So at the end, when they complain, the Israelites complain that what's going on and why should Aaron be the high priest? So Moses says, okay, one representative from each tribe, give me a staff. We're going to put them all in the temple, and whoever staff in the morning has leaves and growth on it, that means that person is chosen of God to be priest. And of course, Aaron was among the 12. So the next morning, lo and behold, one of the staffs is all flowering, and even it's got nuts on it. And whose is it? Aaron's. And so God says to Moses, take this and put it keep it in the temple, in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle. And every time there are rebellion people with B'nai Meri come, B'nai Meri is the term, right? Those are people who are rebellious. And so there's a suggestion that B'nai Maron is modified version to create poetry, but it has to do with rebels. That could work too, actually, right? Because if you're standing in fear and quaking of God, if you have been a rebellious type, you're really feeling it. Okay, so there's 3 options. The most common ones are either sheep or a platoon, a specific number of soldiers, like a tzava, and that's contextually, it fits one or the other, what's before it, right? Numbers of angels, afterwards, numbers of sheep, okay? Or it could be rebellious types. Okay, under any circumstance, it's clear that it is put in here because of poetry, right? Maron, right? Yechafezun, Yochezun, Maron, Marom, Ya'avrum. Okay? Poetry, the use of sounds. All right? And it could be poetic license here. He may have made it up. I don't know. Now, let's just finish the paragraph, and the next time we'll finish the rest of the poem, okay? So then, now the famous line, Kibakarat roe edro, right? As a shepherd passes, checks out his herd, right? Ma'avir tzono tachat shifto, and he causes his sheep to pass under his staff, right? What is he doing? Why is he doing that? Why does a shepherd have all the sheep pass under his staff?
Checking them.
Huh?
To check them, to see how are they.
To check them, to see how are them, to see if he lost any to a wolf.
Right.
Or a lion.
Because the prayer says you have to count them. The later words you have to count them.
Yes, exactly. And that was what shepherds did. Okay? We know from the story of David, it says that he had killed lions with his sling, right? Because there were lions in Eretz Yisrael. We know that for a fact. Okay? And they attacked sheep. And so the job of the shepherd was to keep them away and to make sure that when he wasn't looking, that they got one. So it's his obligation to check them. It's a sign of care. That's the point here. It's not a sign of judgment. You're not judging your sheep. You're counting them because you're concerned about them. That's the imagery here. And it's a major shift, right? It's a major shift. Yes, we're shaking and quaking, but from God's perspective, he is concerned for us. Okay? So, that's Cain ta'avir v'tispor v'timneh v'tifkod nefesh kol chai. So shall God cause to pass and to count and to take the note of and to take account of the souls of every living being. Okay?
In the East, and that is in the Middle East, shepherds still operate in this way, and sheep learn to recognize the shepherd and the staff and the rod.
Really?
When the psalmist, says they comfort him, that's exactly how sheep behave.
Right.
And
very good. Very good. Yes, thank you.
Follow their shepherd is not in the West. If you go to Colorado or New Mexico or Arizona where there's sheep farming, they tend to sheep ranching. They tend to follow the sheep or surround them with dogs or whatever. But
that's right. They have sheepdogs who keep them in tow. Yes,
and they pass through. If there's a gateway, they pass through one by one, and the shepherd watches and counts and goes after anybody who's lifted their way. And Psalm 23 reflects that method of shepherding, which would be familiar to anybody in the Middle East in those days and even now.
Yeah, thank you. That's very. Think of Moses going up the mountain to find the sheep, right? Or so they say. Yes. All right. Anyway, but so the point is, though, along with this, the tachtoch kitzba, the whole bri'ah. Okay, there will be a limit, an end, a final judgment made. Kitzba means a limit. Okay, that's the meaning of it, and it and you cut a limit. It's like you cut this notion of cutting. Lachtoch means to cut. I mean, so it's like you pick it. Imagine a piece of cloth and you cut it. That's the end of it. Okay, so that's the imagery here. Every creature will have a final judgment made. And that's what it says, B'tichtov, and God will write. God will write their judgments. Okay. All right. So this is all future tense. All future tense. Now you can see there's a difference, though, between the first and the second paragraph, even though they're all in the future tense, because the first part, yes, of this paragraph, the first part of the paragraph with all this judgment up in heaven, it's not something that we know. You associate that with a day of great, great judgment. Okay. But when you get to the second part where you see this image of the shepherd, it sort of brings it closer down to earth. This is not heavenly now, right? This is talking about here on earth. And that now could be a segue into what follows, which clearly is us. And so this is a kind of a bridge between the cosmic fear that's associated in the first part, which one can see associated with the final judgment day, and this transition now of the image of the shepherd. That's totally earthly. It's not heavenly. And it brings it closer to us, that this is what God will do to us, right? On the one hand, he's going to judge us, and there will be a verdict that comes out. But on the other hand, he's doing this, in a sense, out of care. He's concerned for us. Let's use the word concern. He's concerned for us. Okay? And then we'll see next time we get down to the tachlis of what's going to happen this year, this coming year. But then on the next page, we're going to see the balance of how God indeed operates, how the system works, how we can manage it, and how ultimately God really does not want us to be punished, but rather God would be much happier if we take the act of repentance seriously. Okay?
Do I have to wait for next week to find out why they used Tzom in the next paragraph, the next sentence?
Why they use what?
Why do they use Tzom? I've been wondering about this for years.
They use what?
Tzom Kippur instead of Yom Kippur.
She's talking about the word Tzom, the fast of Yom Kippur.
Yeah, right. Because why? It's a day of fasting, no? I mean,
why a tzadi instead of a yud?
Tzom is a different word than Yom. Yom is a day, and Tzom means a fast.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, right. No, it's poetry. I mean, I'm sure it's put in there, B'Yom Tzom, right? You could simply say Yom Kippur, or you could say Tzom Kippur. Okay. But by saying Yom Tzom, right, that's emphatic.
A fast day. It means
the fast day. It is. But the sound, again, this is poetry. The poet is looking for sound effects, if you will.
Okay.
That's poems, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Tzom that's right. Tzom is Hebrew for a fast.
Okay.
Yes. In fact, if you read the Haftarah on Yom Kippur from Isaiah, he's saying, is this your fast day? Where you mistreat people, you don't really take things seriously, and this is your big fast day. It's that poem, that prophecy, which is sort of poetic, from Isaiah 56, 57, I believe. That reference is supposed to say to you, how seriously, for this is the morning of Yom Kippur, how seriously are you taking this fast? That's what it's saying. Because if you don't take it seriously, it's not going to help. If you take it seriously, then yes, it'll help. Okay. It has to help you change your attitude. That's what it's about. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Very good. All right, folks. We shall conclude next week. And please read ahead, look at the notes, think about it. And I want to remind you that my favorite of all the scary things in the next passage, and I remember Shmulik, Cantor Kellemer, Alav Shalom, used to make a big deal about this. Do you remember which one he would really put an emphasis on?
No.
Ra'ash, earthquake. very relevant, right? Of all of them, it shook me up. Ha, ha, ha. All right. Goodbye. Shana Tova. And
good week.
You have a good week and a good Shabbos on over the weekend. And we have Slichot. And so you can start repenting if you haven't already. And be well, okay?
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.